you can't just endlessly squeeze out productivity and the ability to juggle multiple things and thoughts in this. I mean, we already have this AI brain fry, which I myself experience tremendously because I am too capable of doing too much with AI at my disposal, that I do move too fast and it creates these problems. And I think you'll have a lot of people that do that. So that's a big problem right there, is you can't just endlessly squeeze out extra focused attention at cheaper and higher scale. Cannot be the problem at high level, high engagement intelligence work in that front.
Welcome to Contrary to Popular Opinion, a podcast hosted by Vujade Digital. In each episode, we bring you provocative topics and novel perspectives around leadership, business, and marketing that defy the norms because exponential growth demands unconventional thinking and visionary action. So open your mind and let's get into this week's episode.
Hey everyone, Kelly McGuire with Vujade Digital. Excited to talk about today's topic.
Hello, Kelly. It's Todd, your partner, and I'm back from spring break. And next week, you get to go on spring break, which is fun. And apparently, we both got the dress code to wear the ubiquitous black t-shirt today.
It's technically forest green, but yeah.
Oh, can't tell on camera. Looks black. Okay, so I did my usual sleuthing around the internet today to find some stuff that we could debate and try to call out. And I found a recent article on DigiDay from Sam Bradley. It was posted a couple of weeks ago, or about a week and a half ago, about the indie media shop Butler Till, whom I have known about for a long time. And they published a case study in conjunction with Programmatic about running sort of the first agentic media buy. And this, in our world, is what is sort of the hype around this is, oh, this is the agency killer. And it's funny that an agency and Programmatic did this because I think in your words earlier, well, if it was really all that successful, they would have just killed themselves. But it's not really about that. It's about, I think, testing what's possible, even though we know now it's still very, very early stage and not perfect, but it's certainly casting light on what could be possible in the future. And the TLDR on this is that thematically, what it suggests is, like everything we're seeing and reading and testing ourselves, is that the technology certainly has the probability of fast tracking and creating efficiency in some of the really low entry level execution layers of media planning and campaign setup and things like that. It is certainly not demonstrating anything yet around the critical thinking, the business intelligence, and all of the decisioning layers that go into what's actually required to run a campaign that delivers business outputs. But having said that, so here we go. We have Butler Till, and they basically built through, I think, a product called AdCP, or they used an MCP and they connected that to Programmatic, and they basically built a campaign in which they eliminated the DSP. So the DSP fees were then applied to working media. So the advertiser got more working media dollars placed. And as a result, apparently the results were, things increased, and it probably just increases a natural cofactor of the media increase. So of course you're going to get more stuff like that. But you read it, and it's kind of hard to ignore that in this, they claim to have had an 80% reduction in supply chain costs, and that all went back into working media by using an agentic platform or system. And so is that threatening? Are we just going to cope with this? Are we going to find a way around it? It looks like it's going to be this disruption, but because if you're the CMO, you're reading this going, whoa, they got faster media and cheaper media and the same performance or better. I just build that. I don't need an agency. I don't need to pay them. I'll just build that. So there's probably a lot skipped in that and what I'm saying, and the fact and this idea that, oh, well, the machine just did this, right? And I think the takeaway is, no, the machine just sort of executed a plan that a whole bunch of humans had to put in place. And so I want to transition over to you there and talk about, like, what is the illusion that this is creating? And I don't really care about it coming from our point of view as an agency. I care about it more from if I'm a marketer and I read this article, would I believe that? Or would I believe parts of it? Or would I just scratch my head? Or how would I think about that? How should they think about that?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts around this. It's a very interesting topic for me that I think there's a lot to dive in with. But I think the easiest way to start is to break it down into the simple logic test of what is being accomplished, what is being done, what are we trying to get through, and what is important in terms of how we can ultimately figure out what they're trying to fix, if you will, or improve or get better. I think it's really important to think about it from the perspective of what does a DSP really do in the first place? What is the value that it creates? And what is to circumvent that looking to accomplish? So I think the approach the first thing that strikes me in the approach is immediately assuming that a DSP is inherently bad or taking too much money or not serving value. And I don't think that that's really true, right? The way that the DSP is structured is meant to be is it is facilitating a streamlined process of organizing all of the supply side partners and all of the components that go into purchasing media to achieve outcomes, which is marrying together all of the bid factors, all of the supply side of things, what you can bid, the data layers, the data targeting, the auction elements, the geography targeting, the measurement, all of these types of things. Like there's value in what that system brings to the table. It's not inherently bad. It is oftentimes misused or misrelied on, or there's a lot of components that create a lot of the problems that make it seem like something needs to be fixed in the process. But if you're using the trade desk, or if you're using DV360, or you're using one of these platforms really well and intelligently and deeply, and not just tossing it over and letting it go, there's really not nearly as many problems if you're truly trying to leverage the tool to its best ability. If you are, again, if you're just trying to use Kokai or the automation tools and all that, yeah, there's lots of problems with that, but you really shouldn't be running it that way anyway, in my opinion. And so now it goes down to this idea that there is a value that can be completely eliminated or repurposed. It's interesting to me when you think of it that way, because even if that was true, at the end of the day, like you are securing ad impressions on properties. And so if you were to unlock that, I feel like the properties themselves would be like, well, I want a bigger piece of that cut. I want to make more money on my high value attention on the pages that people are at, where you're actually serving these types of things. And if you were to recreate the value that DSPs give you, in this case, it's easy to be sort of shock value and like, look what we did, look what we could cut out. But if you really did enable that kind of value, it's eventually going to get charged for. Like no one's doing that altruistically. No one's doing that and saying no one's going to make money. Like Pubmatic's going to make money in this process. The SSP provider is going to make money in this process. The publisher is going to make money in this process. Like it's not just eliminating the economics of what a DSP built to capitalize and to create value so that they could earn money and be valuable. It's just moving the deck chairs around the deck, if you will, in different ways. Again, right now, you can have this shock value as Butler, Till, or someone else and saying, look what we accomplished. And it's attention grabbing and it's interesting, but it's an outlier in a very small use case with cherry picked information that shows what's possible. It's not stress test under scrutiny and scale and complication, right? I would liken it to taking, like the analogy I would use is if you take, a sprinter and you say, okay, this person sprinted really fast and completed a 100-yard dash. Well, that same sprinter, that is very impressive what they did. You're not going to put them on a football field and they're not going to be the greatest football player in the world, because there's a lot of skills and talents and things that go to playing football that isn't just running in a straight line really fast, and they don't translate. Like there's so many things that as you scale and you put scrutiny and you look at what you're trying to accomplish and all the other components that go into placing and buying media, that is not really being accounted for in all of that. And so I look at the complication layers and I look at the practicality of DSPs serve a purpose. They should be used very sophisticated anyway, in which case there shouldn't be as much room to do this streamlining. It's an interesting case in what's possible. I would take it more as an evolution than a revolution, it does underline that there may be shifting ways in which these things can be accomplished and ultimately gotten to. But I think what you're ultimately going to find is, like everything else that I think AI is going to do, you're not necessarily going to eliminate all of the economies and get rid of all these fees and costs and energy. What you're going to do is you're going to shift where those costs get applied to. What you used to maybe have to pay $1,000 for 5 people to spend, each spend a couple of hours accomplishing a task because it's low end stuff. You're now going to probably have to pay for one really talented, really smart person who can leverage these tools. And instead of having to put all that time and energy and cost against the grunt work and the things that didn't work through, you're going to have this really skilled person that can leverage this incredible tool to do even greater things and reach greater heights than ever do. But you're not. And that's the way that I would be shifting in my mind, is you should be paying for greater outcomes and greater talent and greater concentration in value versus saying, okay, well, we got rid of the grunt work stuff and the things that didn't cost as much. And so now I can pay less for the same outcome. Even if that's true, why do you want the same outcome when your outcome could be doubled and tripled if you really leaned into what is possible and what's there?
All right. I heard you say a couple of things around costs where, you talked about somebody's still going to be making the money. And what I'm leaning into on this is, here's an agency, a media agency. I think we've actually gone up against them before. Independent agency. And, we continue to win and lose business oftentimes based on our fee structure, price.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a terrible way to win and lose business, in my opinion, because it does not factor in value. It just commoditizes the relationship, but so be it. And now you have an agency that, in theory, at some point in time could use this case study and say, hey, we're going to charge you less than the next guy, and we're going to get you better results. And here's how we're going to charge you less. We have this AI tech layer now that basically took away the time and labor needed for trafficking and campaign setup and DSP this or that. And now our good people are really just focused on, not pushing buttons and building campaigns, but they're focused on strategy. They're focused on the business strategy and the decision making and, what are we going to optimize for? What data do we trust? What signals matter? What trade-offs are we making? They're doing that, and they're no longer doing all the other stuff. And so in theory, the agency could say, since we've cut all that other stuff out, it saves a bunch of time, and therefore we don't have to charge you as much. And you're saying, well, they're going to make the money anyway. Probably, because we know that most agencies.
So when have you ever seen the opportunity for opaqueness or any kind of ability for value to exist and it's altruistically always passed along? Like someone almost always takes advantage of, no one knows this exists, no one can see behind the curtains or understands this. And so I can just sweep a little bit more over here and make what I think I should be making, but can't really be transparent about and make it.
I know, I understand that. And so the argument I'm trying to make, or the point I'm trying to make, is that in the agency's position, they could hypothetically go to market pitching that they can charge less, because this is what we're up against. We're seeing this in RFPs right now. We're seeing media agencies price work at fees that seemed relative to that budget level 10 years ago. So how could that be? Prices don't go down, they go up, right? And so if that's true economically, the cost of everything goes up, milk, a car, gas, whatever it is. Marketing services costs should be going up, but they're going down. The fees that are winning RFPs right now are less than what they were 5 years ago, which makes no sense. So how is that made possible? Well, as an operator, it's made possible by scaling volume, reducing labor costs, reducing overhead expenses, all those things, right? So how can the agency...
It's cutting corners, or it's making money in other ways that isn't as obvious. Those are the only two answers.
Okay, so let's assume the corner cutting then is the agentic layer, which fills in for the lower level, entry level time and labor things, the ad campaign trafficking, all the campaign setup, right? Like if you went to our media team and said, hey, we've removed all that bottom layer of like logistical setup of campaigns and trafficking and all that stuff, and now all you have to do is these couple of things. Now that, in theory, right? Just hear me out. In theory, that same team who is utilized it a certain way the idea is maybe from the agency side is, well, that same team now can take on 40, 50, 60, 80% more utilization. So now the agency is more profitable because that same team, without increasing overhead expenses, can manage more billable dollars of media because they're not doing all those entry point level tasks and admin things, right? And so that's the idea, I think. So you're saying, but the agency's still going to make money. Well, where they make money is, again, assume expenses, overhead doesn't go up, but they increase their revenue utilization of their team by 50%. So now their profit margin's going to go up.
But you're missing a really important component in here, and you're treating this like it's a black and white zero sum game, and that we're not dealing with human beings and biology and things like that. Like,
I'm being very specific because I'm being very specific on what the agentic systems are supposed to.
I understand, but
be able to
we're missing a really important component in here, and I'll go to a few things, but I want to hit on this one point in here. Just on it is, let's take everything you just said as truth, right? You can get rid of all the lower value bandwidth and task and all that, and you have so much more time and energy to put towards the more sophisticated stuff. I'm going to come back to that because I don't agree with a lot of that in and of itself, but let's just take that at face value. That in and of itself has two major problems to it in the cost benefit analysis element of it. The first is, you are assuming that even brilliant, intelligent, hyper-productive people have endless capacity to run at full utilization and use their mind across multiple clients, multiple concepts, multiple ideas at the fastest complete element without frying out your brain and completely losing and having burnout on there. So what used to be like, okay, I can take a little bit of a mental load break and maybe write a brief or do something else. If you are now saying you don't get to do that anymore, you have to be hyper-focused and dialed in and doing high strategy work at 8 hours a day so that we can make up for all this lost ground on fees, you may not have that person for very long before they have a mental breakdown or completely fry out completely.
Keep in mind, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm saying clients are expecting agencies to be able to do this for cheaper and faster.
I know, but that's what I'm saying is, I think everyone is forgetting that in this race for AI and intelligence, that the human element, we still have biology, we still have control for it. So other than the fact that you can't just endlessly squeeze out productivity and the ability to juggle multiple things and thoughts in this, I mean, we already have this AI brain fry, which I myself experience tremendously because I am too capable of doing too much with AI at my disposal, that I do move too fast and it creates these problems. And I think you'll have a lot of people that do that. So that's a big problem right there, is you can't just endlessly squeeze out extra focused attention at cheaper and higher scale. Cannot be the problem at high level, high engagement, intelligence work in that front. But let's take that away and say, even if you can, let's say you find super people that can do that and are incredibly valuable. You really think that the more valuable and unique those people are, they're not going to expect to make more and get better? If now I'm doing the job of what 5 or 10 people used to do, you're going to pay me the same amount? Like, the client's going to get the same value and 10 more clients are going to get the value out of what I'm doing, and I'm not going to expect a benefit out of that in some way? Like, that doesn't pass the logic test. There's no logic where all of this comes together in a end result person who has to ultimately get the benefit, which is the client who is making money, who's getting the economic value out of all of this, gets to just pay a lot less, and it works the same way it's always worked. Every avenue you go down and what this does, something breaks and there's some roadblock in the logic test of whether or not it works that way or not. Now, there are people that will take advantage of the opportunity to differentiate themselves, to tell a story, right? It is very competitive out here. Everyone is trying to win a client and have a breakthrough in there. So there will be grandiose promises made and races to the bottom in order to get there. But again, we are all going to run ourselves into a problem zone where it's going to say, uh-oh, now we've all raced to the bottom. Now we've all, set this new expectation as value, and none of us can make it work. And there's problems across the board for everybody. And it's going to be another one of these cycles that the system in the industry we're in breaks itself if it's not careful.
Okay. Let me ask the question again more directly, or let's talk about this a little bit more directly. When I talked about these agentic systems being built, things we're reading about, even some of the stuff that we're imagining, you're imagining, and our own sort of AI powered operations system, our AOS, you've been thinking about ways that our people can access, query, come up with more information faster because of the tech power, right, that sits on all that stuff. So again, how does that not fit the same thing that you just described of, well, then our team's certainly going to get overrun by how much they can do in a period of time to create more value for our clients that they expect, all the while expecting us to work for less money when the really important people cost more money. But again, the tech is supposed to cut a lot of corners, right? So in media planning right now, and the logistics of that, what we're reading and seeing and hearing is that these agentic systems might take away a lot of the entry level stuff.
That's the layer of our industry I think is going to get killed. The ability to get entry level and to grow and to learn and be exposed to it, that's a gap that I think is going to widen tremendously.
Well, so I'm going to go back to that then, because this is where I'm saying where if these agentic systems can hypothetically really fast track, again, creative, like stuff I'm reading now just almost sounds like it makes dynamic creative optimization stuff obsolete, not needed. It's already built into the AI. If ad trafficking, audience targeting, geography, budgeting, total addressable audience planning and budgeting, like all these things that go into that, like if that can all be done in an ad platform, whether it's Meta or Google or something else, TikTok, if eventually those systems are intelligent enough where all that kind of stuff can just be done by the system, you can just simply say, here's the URL, here's the product, here's an image of the product, here's a brief, a really, really strategically well-written brief, which maybe that's where a lot of the time and effort goes into. And then all the rest of it can be done agentically. How many hours does that cut out, right? And so again, hypothetically, let's assume that can be done. A media planning buying team, if they don't have to do that, doesn't that create hours back in the day that they can use for the next campaign or 3 more campaigns in the day that they wouldn't have been able to do before because they were doing all that trafficking and setting up of the campaigns, right? Like if that goes away, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, I guess, like, I don't know, think of anything where you have to spend a whole bunch of time in the upfront to get to the end state. And if you don't have to do that anymore, you just get to the end state. Again, this is all hypothetical, right? Because none of this is, other than this case study, this is the first one I've read where somebody's actually said publicly they've tried it. Why doesn't that create more hours in the day for a team to work on more billable dollars, which in theory makes the agency more profitable because they didn't increase overhead expenses and they increased billable capacity?
Again, if you are using it at its basis layer, absolutely it can. If the majority of your budgets are going towards that lower level of grunt work, but that's always been the layer that you could cut the most quarters. You could have always outsourced that. There was a lot of automated things. There's overseas work, there's outsourcing, there's all of that. That's the lowest end layer, right? And so if some of that gets made easier, what you're not accounting for is that is just the lowering of that bottom layer. You're not accounting for what it introduces net new, which is capabilities to go further and to do more with data, to explore further, to get better in every way that requires a lot more brain power and energy and expertise and experience, which is all about high value things to do better. So again, if your sole purpose is to just save money and keep getting what you've always been getting, you can probably save money.
Isn't that what most clients want?
No, I mean, maybe, but it should be, if you're a client, is for what I'm getting, I want better than what I used to get. Not the same as what I used to get for cheaper, but I want better because better is now possible.
Okay,
and
true.
That takes more.
True, but okay, follow my dumb math here. Again, let's say we have a team of 6 that works on a campaign. And let's say through some agentic development, that team, every person on that team gets an hour back in their day. So now everybody has, in totality, there's 6 more hours that can be devoted to the client's campaign. And somehow that 6 hours is used to do other stuff that somehow impacts the campaign performance. Now that client's getting better performance, better output, whatever that is, for the same team and the same money. And isn't that what
But that's not saving money.
after?
What you're saying is instead of continuing to pay for those 6 hours, they get reallocated to higher value things. Literally get rid of those 6 hours and pay less.
That's one case. In the case study, the Butler Till case study, they actually, their whole point of this case study was they compressed the supply chain fees, took those fees and reallocated them to working media.
Yeah, again, I still have a problem with that overall. Like I said, I think it's a very cherry-picked, very specific area where you're just shifting the value from the DSP to another provider. And again, you're using this instance right now where you don't
they didn't shift it to another provider. They put it into working media. They bought more media as a result of
they're still accessing the SSP. There's still money being done there. So again,
yes, but they saved money on the DSP fees.
Sure, but the DSP wasn't doing nothing. It wasn't just taking fees for doing nothing. They replaced that with somewhere else. And like I said, right now, no one needs to monetize that. They're just trying the shock value of look at what we can do. If that were to work, if you were to replace what the DSP was earning their fees, all right, DSPs are not inherently evil. They make money for doing a service that is useful and valuable if you do it right. If you replace that useful and valuable service some other way, eventually the value that's created in enabling that process, somebody's going to monetize that. It is not going, it's not.
It doesn't mean the agency has to monetize it. It doesn't mean the agency has to do it. It might mean they still deliver the same or more to a client for the same or less price. I mean, look, it's black and white. If they did not run through a DSP, if they literally bypassed the DSP and did not pay those fees, let's say that was, $10,000 in the campaign, and they took that $10,000 and said, buy $10,000 more worth of ads. That's black and white. They bought $10,000 more worth of ads for the same budget.
Yeah, again, but if it's a single channel buy, right? If you're going across mobile, streaming audio, multi-channel, multi-audience targeting, different geographies, different hold access, all of that, like the layering of all of that enablement, it's not a full-scale, fully sophisticated area. Again, in my mind, it probably, look, I don't know the details. I didn't run the experiment, but my guess in the simplistic way it was presented out was it replaced all those 80% of fees, because DSPs, if you're using them right, don't charge that much fees. If you're using the right DSP in the right way, in the right area, there should not be 80% of anything to be reallocated. You are misspending if there's that much meat on the bone.
Have you read all the headlines lately about the DSPs and all the fees they're charging?
There's a reason I don't use most of them, and I don't recommend most of them. We use what we use because we are hands-on and we're not, if it's a managed service, if there's other things, yes, there are really bad actors and players out there in there. There are also DSPs that you can use very appropriately and very well in the way that they should be used that do not take that egregious amounts of elements out of the campaigns in there. And this is a whole problem that people don't even understand the difference in spectrum that exists there. Not all DSPs and not all usage of DSPs is equal by any stretch of the imagination.
Of course, but the general sense is that the DSPs make a lot of money in layers that even we as the agency can't see. I mean, that's just all over the internet, has been,
you can only say that if you believe that they don't bring any value in a very complicated buying system in order to allow for the outcomes that exist.
Not saying that they don't bring value.
It's not as simple as just aggregate inventory and make an auction available. There are many more things that go into the layering of a sophisticated campaign that all exists under one house and one system.
It's not saying that they're not valuable. It's saying that you don't always know that they're making money in places that they're making money. And that's a lot of been what's in the headlines. That's the whole Publicis Trade Desk argument, is that,
but the funny thing is the argument is Trade Desk is the most transparent of all of them that you do know. I can name a whole host of list of other ones that are way more opaque and do make way more than they should, which is why I don't use them.
Well, again, I mean, the whole article and the other stuff that I talked to you about with OpenPath and the Trade Desk and stuff is that there are fees being made that aren't transparent, and the agencies don't know that. And so again, this all goes back to clients want more for less. And if and this case study presents a case where they were able to engineer bypassing a DSP and going straight to an SSP, a supply side system, building an agentic workflow and bypassing the DSP. And so, yes, it was one small test, one small instance, but everything starts that way. So to think that this isn't going to potentially spawn more experiments and more ways for things to happen, I think we'd be fools not to think that.
No, things will evolve, right? This evolution happened when DSPs themselves became available, right? You used to have the rep that you used to buy your contracts from. And I'm sure at that time people are like, well, the DSPs, they're just remnant inventory and they have all these problems. And I'm the buyer. You only get premium for me and you have to pay these fees. And there's a value in having a human relationship and doing all these. And then the DSP evolved. It was not great initially, and then it evolved and it got better and it got more sophisticated. And this is an evolution. I don't know exactly where it will go, but the idea that it's just simply going to magically make everything cheaper and easier without other cascading effects of economic value that gets replaced and necessities that exist, it's just naive to think that it's like, okay, I can get exactly what I was getting or better for somehow significantly cheaper. And I'm not just shuffling problems around. Again, even in the very, very best case scenario where these systems do everything they promise to do, which absolutely will not be the case, all that's going to happen is you're going to shift from I'm paying for lower end labor hours to I'm paying a lot more money for the very smartest people who understand the complication of these networks and can get the best out of them. Or you're going to think you're paying for that and you're not going to get that. And then it's a whole cascading problems of I'm paying less, but I'm getting worse.
Well, isn't that usually the universal truth? You get what you pay for.
Yeah. But for some reason, no one thinks that they're the ones falling into that trap. It's always someone else that made that mistake.
Yeah. Well, all right. Enough of that debate. I think it's interesting. We're not on the bleeding edge of things like maybe some other agencies that are bigger and have more R&D budgets and people and resources to get on that bleeding edge, like this experiment that Butler Till did. I think hats off to them that they built a campaign in this way to at least test what happens. And if what happened in this case is they bypassed the DSP and all those fees that they would have paid went back into working media, I don't know. That seems like a win to me, but that's a very microscopic, sort of one test. Like you said, it's just one little thing, but I think, well, that one little thing is going to lead to much bigger things over time. And again, to me, it just tells me that the technology is probably definitely going to start to weed out the lower level tasks that go to certain job functions. And as a result, what you're saying is who's going to be left are really smart senior strategic people who are the critical thinkers and decision makers that run all of this stuff. It's almost like we all become strategy engineers. And from what I know, engineers are some of the highest paid jobs out there. So I don't see the labor costs of the really good people declining. I see it only increasing. But I do see how there could be a belief that the lower level labor costs would be reduced. Mm-hmm. And as a result, some clients are going to think, well, then you shouldn't be charging me as much. And the argument will be, well, we're charging you as much or more because all this technology licensing costs a lot more money. And the labor force that's required to use it now is only senior talent, and they cost a lot more money. So in fact, it doesn't make anything go down. It just makes everything more complicated and more expensive.
We're not alone in this industry, right? I mean, the legal profession, right? Paralegal work is getting AI'd out. I don't think lawyers are getting paid less. Your McKinsey consultants, their junior work and their research analysts and their deck building skills is getting out. I don't think they're getting paid a whole lot less. There's an element of the value is still at the top and the capabilities are still in there. Again, it will shift. Not everything I'm saying will be exactly how it goes through, but it's no different than the same argument I had before. Sure, you might be able to find ways to get the same cheaper. I would argue that's a really bad way to try and get what's really possible here, which is really improve your outcomes and keep up with everything. As that water rises, everyone's got to keep swimming to a different degree, and you got to get better that goes through that. I mean, it's just, I don't understand the inclination to believe that the things that are automatable are the things that you're mostly paying for value exchange. Like economies still work on value exchange. Create value, pay for value, get value out. That's still the value is still the outcome in the business raising of when you do marketing. I get more customers. My business, my ROI goes all of that. It's not looking at this as a zero sum game of I'm just paying someone to click buttons and magically run things on Google, and that just creates everything working as well as it can be. It's oversimplification of what we really do.
From your lips to God's ears, as our former mentor used to say. Okay, well, have a good spring break next week, and I'll look for another good topic to kick around, and I'll talk to you then.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Contrary to Popular Opinion, where we challenge you to think independently, push the limits, and take uncommon action so you can achieve game-changing results in your business and your life. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.